That's Jimmy Stein. I'm Clint Lamb, and this is the Cover Crimson YouTube channel. Jimmy, it is game week. Alabama is going to be playing Indiana in the Rose Bowl on Thursday. College football playoffs, huge stage. Not a whole lot of people are giving Alabama much of a chance. I say that. There are people picking Alabama. There are people that are, some are admitting, like, I can't get past the logo. I can't get past the fact that Alabama has experience in these big games, and Indiana really doesn't have a whole lot. Like, there are things that are favoring Alabama, and there are some people picking Alabama. The wide majority of people, because Indiana is such a complete football team and they're the number one team, it's not like they haven't played anybody too. The fact that they have played two other college football playoff teams and beaten both, that has given people the confidence that this Indiana team is for real. So the conversation has already been interesting, but it's going to get even more interesting this week because everything, in my opinion, the closer you get, the more everything's going to get turned up. So today, we're going to be talking about just one side of the football. We'll be doing a completely separate video. Normally, we do them both. We record both in the same day, but we're going to be recording on Monday and Tuesday this week because the game is on Thursday. I'll also be doing some mailbags, a lot of interesting conversations. But before we get into all that, let's start with just what are your thoughts on this Indiana-Alabama matchup heading into Thursday?
Well, if you go by the statistical profiles, like you just look at the stats and you're trying to pick a winner or try to pick an outcome here, it's literally impossible not to predict Indiana. And I think that's where most of these predictions come from. I mean, when you look at the overall numbers produced by Indiana versus their schedule and the overall numbers produced by Alabama and their schedule, it's just hard not to come to the conclusion that Indiana's the better football team. Now, that said, how much of Indiana's numbers and how much of their success is schedule driven? I think a lot of Alabama fans confuse this Indiana team with last year's Indiana team. And I do agree that last year's Indiana team made it to the college football playoff largely on the back of a really weak water schedule. And they didn't have to beat many or any good teams to get there. They just simply beat everyone that they were better than, and a credit to Curt Cignetti in year one that made Indiana better than most of the teams on their schedule, because traditionally Indiana's not, regardless of their schedule. This year's Indiana team is different. They are beating good teams. They've beaten several good teams. They have not played a weak water schedule at all. They have not played Alabama's schedule, but they have not played a bad schedule. As a matter of fact, right now, I think ESPN has them 28. I'm sure that includes their game, of course, against Ohio State at the end. But 28, that's not bad at all. There's, a matter of fact, there's two or three teams, including Ole Miss, with a worse strength of schedule number than Indiana. So how much of Indiana's success is based on who they've played? How much of their numbers is based on who they're played? That we're going to find out. I do think Alabama has played a tougher schedule than Indiana by far. So Alabama's numbers are better than they just look on paper because of who they've played. Indiana's numbers probably aren't quite as good based on who they've played. I think the game's a little more even than the numbers suggest because strength of schedule. But here's the point, Clint, that gets me a little pessimistic, and I'm going to talk about all the reasons I'm optimistic too. But the reason I'm pessimistic here a little bit, Clint, is Alabama is one-dimensional. Indiana is not. Indiana runs the ball really well. They throw it really well. Alabama throws it well and doesn't run the ball well at all. It's almost like a litmus test. How far can a team go in the college football playoff and advance when they are largely just one-dimensional? My answer to that, without getting into my emotional ties to Alabama, would be probably not very far. So that's what gives me great pause. I do think all along, I've said this kind of all year and either said it out loud or between the lines, or I've certainly felt this way. At some point, Alabama's inability to run the football is going to cost them, and then the season will be over. This is that week where that could be the case. Alabama's complete inability to run the ball, just making them too one-dimensional against a quality defense, and clearly Indiana's got that. So for all those reasons, I'm a little pessimistic. But spoiler alert, at the end of this show or tomorrow's, I'm probably picking Alabama to win because I do think Alabama is going to win the game because I think a lot of Alabama's numbers are wrong. And by that, I mean the numbers that they put up in November are misleading because the team is better than that. They just weren't healthy. Now they're healthy. Now they're confident. I think Indiana might be a little surprised at the Alabama team they see Thursday that's not aligned with their statistical profile.
Yes, that is, I think, a great way of putting it. I think that is, to me, one of the big reasons why I think Alabama's got a real shot in this football game is that I think there's this misrepresentation of what Alabama is based off of the fact that they hit a pretty steep injury run. They've gotten a majority of those players back. They've gotten a majority of those players healthy. I think that's going to end up making a pretty significant difference. Now, the weather to me is something that you and I talked about before we hopped on the show, and it's something that I definitely think is going to play a massive factor in this game. James Spann has been reporting consistently that they are expecting rain. It should be a pretty heavy amount of rain. It will be somewhat sporadic. I think it'll be on and off, I guess is the way to put it. But it will be, he's even saying there's the possibility for some lightning issues. And he said that has not happened in the Rose Bowl in a very, very, very long time. In fact, I think he said that just rain being a massive factor in the Rose Bowl has not been a factor since, like, I want to say he said like 1955 or something like that.
Wow.
So it is pretty wild that this is like a, once in a century type of potential impact on the game. But obviously you got to play, you got to play through whatever obstacles are presented, hit the ball where it lies. If you're a Happy Gilmore fan, you got to just take whatever situation you're given. A lot of people, because of the weather, they say, okay, Indiana can run the football, Alabama can't. So, and defensively, I would say they're fairly even. That makes a lot of people lean Indiana. They feel like Indiana will have more rushing success against Alabama's defense, which has also been susceptible to some explosive runs, allowing some explosive runs periodically throughout the season. Then Alabama will have success running against Indiana's defense, which obviously stopped a fairly effective Ohio State run game in the Big Ten championship. I think it is interesting, though, because there's also an argument to be made that Alabama has consistently dealt with not having its run game. It's relied on its passing game. Like, one of the things that I think it was a backup linebacker. He plays a ton. Isaiah Benson, I believe, is his name. Mm-hmm. Isaiah Jones. He was asked about Isaiah this matchup, Jones. And he said, we want to make Alabama play. Was it left-handed? I think was the comment. Pretty much makes them uncomfortable. Quote. What would be hilarious is if you game plan, you designed everything to stop Alabama's passing game and make them run the football to beat you, and then the weather takes care of that for you. It's almost like if I was preparing, I'd be more so preparing for a run game. You've got to prepare for the passing game too. Don't get me wrong. It's what Alabama does well. You can't rely on Mother Nature if you don't prepare for that, and then all of a sudden it ends up being fairly clear and the passing games end up making an impact. You've really set yourself back. So I understand the logic, but it's also possible that Alabama is already preparing for a game in which they're going to be limited being able to throw the football. And if that is the case, yes, that makes you uncomfortable, but I actually think they've started to show signs of being able to run the football more effectively. So I don't necessarily think that's as big of a disadvantage as some people make it out to be or think that it's going to be. The other element of this is if you take away Fernando Mendoza and Indiana's passing game due to the weather, explain to me how Indiana is vastly different than Missouri, because they were very limited at quarterback and their run game was very dominant. Ahmad Hardy, as far as the zone-based concept. Now, granted, Missouri's going to be an outside, a wide zone team a lot more than Indiana. Indiana's more inside zone, but I think Alabama's got the dudes inside, especially with getting LT Overton back, where they're very tough but to run between the tackles against them. A lot of the explosive plays that they have allowed this season have been out on the perimeter. So, that's something that in some ways I feel like that while the bare bones suggest Indiana having a significant advantage, when you actually start breaking it down, I don't think it's as significant as maybe some of those numbers would indicate.
Rain changes everything for me. I mean, in this sense, I think the conventional wisdom is going to be if it's a slop fest, it favors Indiana. They run the ball better than Alabama does. Well, first of all, I certainly don't argue that that's incorrect. Yes, Indiana runs the ball better than Alabama does. I'm not so sure Austin P doesn't run the ball better than Alabama does. But rain changes everything. And by that, I mean, if it's a slop fest and it's hard to hold on to the football and it's hard to stick your foot in the ground and make a cut because it's slippery, it doesn't matter in my mind that Indiana's ground game is a little better than Alabama's. It sort of turns into a game of chance. When you pitch the
Correct.
when you pitch the ball to the running back and the running back has Justin Jefferson right in front of him who's about to stop the play for no gain and the running back makes a cut. In my mind, and if you have a different opinion, it's fine. Anybody have a different opinion of this, but in my mind, as the running back makes a cut to make Justin Jefferson miss him, in my mind, it is 50-50 as to which one of those two players is going to slip. 50-50. It doesn't matter whether the back is the superior player, whether Justin Jefferson's the superior athlete. Either one of them can just slip. As a matter of fact, probably both of them will. When it's slippery, I think a lot of the talent, the scheme, I think a lot of that's out the door. And it just almost turns into a game of chance. Who can hold on to the ball? It's not, hey, Indiana's only turned it over 8 times all year. You'd say, well, if it rains, that favors Indiana. They don't turn over the ball. Have they played in a driving rainstorm?
Correct.
It doesn't mean they can hold on to the ball any better than Alabama in those type conditions. I think the rain makes some Alabama fans nervous. I'll bring up one fairly recent rain game, the South Florida game, in 2023. I think part of the reason that game wasn't pretty for Alabama, which, by the way, Alabama did win, and who was the quarterback? Ty Simpson was kind of largely responsible for Alabama winning that football game, ironically. That game, I think, in part, was a little ugly for Alabama's offense because of the weather. I think the slop fest made it more difficult for Alabama, particularly with a different quarterback, to execute the offense. Keep this in mind. South Florida didn't have any offense either. I mean, Alabama won the game because South Florida couldn't move the ball and score either on Alabama's defense. So I think if it's a slop fest, Clint, all the analysis that me and you are going to do, that we spent time on and that we look forward to delivering, I think a lot of it's based on, a dome type conditions, 72 degrees and no weather. If it's a true slop fest, to me, so much of it comes down to a coin flip. Who's going to slip? Who's going to drop the ball? I think talent doesn't really matter as much in terrible conditions. It's going to come down to who is mentally tougher, who's physically tougher, who wants this more than the other guy is what it will come down to.
I agree with that. And I think that, Alabama, I think underestimating Alabama's run game could end up being the downfall for Indiana. And I know that sounds very like, whoa, that sounds, based off of what we've seen, like nothing would indicate that. Indiana is built off of balance. That's what they do. A lot of early rundowns put them in favorable situations. It allows the RPOs to open up. It allows the play action to open up. And they play Fernando Mendoza, and he executes at a very high level off of that. If you take away that complementary element, and now granted, when Alabama does, if it's broken down into running the ball and throwing the football, if Alabama doesn't run the football well and they throw the football well, and then the weather ends up impacting their ability to do the one thing they do well, that would seem to indicate that's not good. I think the run game has been steadily showing some improvement and some signs where you will get more out of it than people think, especially if the game plan going in is we're going to take away what Alabama does well, which is throwing the football, and then the weather takes care of that for you, because then you've got to shift the game plan. Now it's more of an emphasis on stopping the run games. But if Alabama is able to do that, which they have been able to, everybody thought that Missouri was going to be able to run all over Alabama because they are such a strong rushing offense. And up to that point, Alabama had been allowing some explosives on the ground. In a sloppy, wet game, the two times that has happened, you talk about that South Florida game a couple of years ago. You talk about Florida State in the season opener. And granted, that wasn't overly sloppy, and it was just some periods of rain, but there was some sloppiness to it. The difference between those two games and this game is that they had dual threat quarterbacks to if Alabama had Jalen Milroe in this game, where now you had multiple dynamic rushing elements, I think in some ways this would be a game that would favor a Jalen Milroe-led offense. If it is as sloppy as we think it's going to be, then it would be maybe a Ty Simpson-led offense. With that being said, you're also not going against that dynamic presence as a runner at quarterback, adding a +1 to the run game. Now, Fernando Mendoza is more mobile than given credit. Bo Pribula is more mobile. Like, he's a mobile guy. He's a +1 in the run game. That's kind of how and Alabama was able to do a very effective job of limiting their offensive success in that football game, making life difficult. And I just wonder how Alabama is used to having things taken away from them. They're used to playing in very uncomfortable situations, and some of that is self-inflicted. Indiana has dealt with some of that. Like, Penn State made some things difficult. Like, they've had difficulties offensively. They haven't had the, but they've been able to pretty consistently run the football. If Alabama, with what I think is a better run defense than the numbers would indicate, if they're able to slow down or limit what Indiana wants to do on early downs, and they can't turn to Fernando Mendoza due to the weather, I think that will set them up for a lot of frustration that they are not used to. Alabama is used to not being able to move the ball offensively because they've taken away some of your passing game. Ty Simpson's a little bit off. Guys are banged up. You don't have guys available, and you haven't been able to run the football to compensate for that all year. So I just think that there are a combination of factors in this football game that actually could end up lending to Alabama playing. Like, in this type of game, the favorite is the more, like, if you were to have a perfectly healthy, in a dome like you're talking about, Indiana versus Alabama, and Indiana had everything at their disposal. They have more, according to a lot of people. They're very balanced defensively. They stop the run well. They get after the quarterback. They generate turnovers. Offensively, they can run the football. They can play off of that. Potential top 5, top 3, maybe #1 overall quarterback, won the Heisman Trophy in Fernando Mendoza. You just would think, with all things being neutral, at a neutral place, the weather is not a factor. You would think that would favor Indiana. The more that the weather impacts both teams, in some ways it starts to favor a dog like Alabama, maybe more so than even Indiana.
I couldn't agree with that more. I think that while, in my mind, Indiana is a favorite in the game, but shouldn't be the favorite that they are. I think Alabama is being underestimated, and Indiana is being a little overestimated, largely because of schedule and who they've played. And I do think that, that Florida State game feels like 3 years ago, but I still think it's there in the minds of a lot of the neutral observers that, gosh, the Alabama team lost to Florida State. I think that us Alabama fans that have lived this season and seen the team every week, we've sort of flushed that. I think the team has. I think the Alabama fans have, but I don't think the neutral observers have. And I think that's been baked into this. Everyone picking Indiana. I think that Florida State result, but Alabama's a little better than I think the odds. I think Indiana's favored by 6.5. I don't think they should be. I think they should be favored to win the game. I'm just a little surprised at 6.5 and not something more like 3.5 or 4.5. Secondly, if Alabama was truly an underdog, like let's say Alabama was playing a team that I'm just not sure even at our best we measure up to those guys, you know what I'd really want to happen? Rain. Rain is what I would want to happen. Not rain out. No, rain. Give me a sloppy ball. Give me something that acts as some sort of a neutralizer. So, like you said, I think some of Indiana's advantages sort of dissipate in the rain. Instead of, I think, the most common take will be, oh, Indiana runs the ball better than Alabama. This rain favors them. I think it doesn't. I think it makes the game even more equal, because what impresses me most when I look at Indiana's season and their numbers, Clint, is the balance. They can beat you both ways, but they don't beat you throwing the ball in the sense that Fernando Mendoza is going to throw for 400 yards. He doesn't.
Correct.
As a matter of fact, he's thrown for less yards than like in the past 20, 30 years. I think only one Heisman quarterback winner has thrown for less yards than Mendoza has. He's efficient. He's not, bombing you with PlayStation numbers. He's efficient. In the run game, they're not 95 Nebraska. They're not running for 400 against good teams. As a matter of fact, against Ohio State, Oregon, Iowa, they ran the ball well, but they ran the ball for like 120 yards, 130 yards. They didn't, bomb those guys for 250 plus. They did that against bad teams, but against good teams, they didn't rack up a lot of rushing yards. But what makes Indiana so difficult to defend is the balance. They can throw it efficiently. They run it efficiently. Therefore, they're hard to defend. You can't over defend one thing or the other. They do it both. They call it well, and they don't make mistakes. Only 8 turnovers all year. They're not going to give anything away. Introduce some rain into that. Now you've affected the balance. Now you've affected the fact they don't turn over the ball, because now you've got a greasy, slippery ball that anyone's going to turn over. I think the rain, I'm not saying it favors Alabama. I do think it would diminish some of Indiana's assets or diminish some of their advantages. And that's why I'm not against this rain, but the rain also comes down to mental and physical toughness.
Correct.
You have to convince your football team, if you know it's going to rain, you have to convince your team that you want to play in the rain. Like, we got them right where we want them. We got them right where we want them. We're going to revel playing in the rain. We're excited about the rain. The first team that gets like, oh man, if it was sunshine and we'd be playing better. The first team that has that enter their mind is done. They're done.
Correct.
You've got to be excited. I remember, terrible analogy, all the way back to 2012, Alabama softball. It's a tight game. They're playing for the national championship. They're a little bit behind. They're playing a phenomenal dynasty type team. And then it rains. And it rained late in the game, and there was a delay. And you could tell when it rained, it killed Oklahoma's momentum. They looked sad. Somehow Patrick Murphy and his girls got excited about the rain, got excited about playing in the rain. And when the game resumed and it was wet, they were fired up about it. They were like this, they were excited about the new conditions. Oklahoma was like, oh no. And Alabama won the game and won the national championship. And it's that sort of mindset that the winner of Thursday's football game is going to have, that they want the rain. They want to play in the rain. They want the slop fest. They feel like they've got the opponent right where they want them.
And that's kind of where I was getting at with the whole, if this becomes a rain game and everybody starts talking about it through that lens, I think fewer people give Alabama a chance because of the fact that they can't run the football, and that would lend itself more to Indiana. And I think that would probably give Alabama a bigger chip on its shoulder as far as, hey, that for whatever reason, and you can say for whatever reason, but they're not giving you guys a chance because they say we can't run the football. We're about to shock the world. Ty Simpson keeps on talking about us against the world. Well, no one believes if it becomes a run-based football game through necessity that Alabama's going to win that football game. And I'm here to tell you that I think it's a lot more equal than you would think based off of the numbers. Not saying it doesn't lend itself to give Indiana an advantage. I think that would be foolish to say. But I also think that there are other elements of this from a motivational standpoint, from an underestimating standpoint, that really could end up benefiting Alabama. And it's like you said, it becomes more of a game of chance. And that's where it's like, okay, there are still scenarios in that game where just, Alabama doesn't protect the football well enough. Indiana, self-inflicted problems for Alabama end up causing them to turn the ball over multiple times. And Alabama gets blown out as a result. And had it been in a dome with weather being, not a factor, the game could have ended up being closer as a result of that. Like, that is a scenario. I just think there's a lot of scenarios that play in Alabama's favor as well. Now, this is something else that I want to talk about. Why is it that we focus in on the fact that, Alabama lost to Florida State in the season opener? And granted, sloppy game. I guess you did win the turnover battle because you won 1-0, but you talk about that mobile quarterback. but yet people will excuse the fact that Indiana started off against Old Dominion and they won 27-14. They got down 7-0 in the first quarter. It wasn't until a 91-yard punt return for a touchdown to tie the game up. And then on the ensuing possession, I think Old Dominion throws an interception to start the second quarter, in which Indiana had to settle for a field goal after that interception. They get up 10-0. They end up winning 27-14. And I want to say at one point they were up 7-7. So they were up by quite a bit. But this is Old Dominion. A lot of people will say, well, that was Fernando Mendoza's first start for Indiana. Well, I'm pretty sure that was Ty Simpson's first ever career start against Florida State. And I just think that, like, we can dismiss everything that because they won the game, this is what we typically do. Oh, they came out flat. It's the season opener. The only time that Indiana has had a 30-day plus layover, it was to start the season, and they look like crap, in my opinion. They figured out a lot of things since then, but there's still some unknowns there. And I feel like everybody will point back to week one to talk bad about Alabama since that loss to Florida State. And since that terrible performance, in my opinion, from Indiana against Old Dominion, Indiana is undefeated. Give them credit. And they have 2 wins over 2 college football playoff teams. Alabama has played 4 teams. 2 of them. Now, granted, Vanderbilt was not a playoff team, but a borderline. They have played 4 games, and really, actually, maybe, what is that, 5? Because they played Georgia twice, Oklahoma twice, and Vanderbilt. They're 3-2 in those games. And did Indiana, after playing Oregon, have they had to play them in a rematch? Or since they played Ohio State, have they had to play them in a rematch where it's harder to beat a team twice? Alabama looked terrible in the SEC championship. I think between that and the fact they lost to Florida State, there starts to become this perception that Alabama is just not a very good football team, and they have had their fair share of issues. I'm not saying that they haven't. I just think that people sometimes get overly emotional about some of this stuff, and it's like I don't think the team you're going to get on Thursday is what you saw from Alabama against Georgia in the SEC championship, and I don't think it's going to be, from an effort standpoint, for one reason or another, what you saw from Alabama in the season opener against Florida State. Other than those 2 games, it's been one close loss. You lose the turnover battle 3-0 against Oklahoma, a college football playoff team, and you lose by 2 points. Otherwise, while they haven't looked great in all these games, neither is Indiana. They've beat up on the Purdue's and stuff, but when they struggled against Penn State. They struggled at times against Iowa. So I don't know. I don't think it's as big of a gap as some people make it out to be.
There's 2 outlier games that I think if you just chunked out these games, the view of Alabama and the view of Indiana would be different. I might surprise y'all with the Indiana pick, but the outlier game for Alabama for me is Florida State. I don't think that's a team Alabama. I think Alabama would have sort of crushed Florida State mid-season and even late season when Alabama started limping down the stretch, literally limping down the stretch because they were hurt. But even limping down the stretch, I think the November Alabama team would have also beat November Florida State. But they did lose week 1. But that's an out. I don't think Alabama played like that again all season long. So just throw it out. And if you throw out, I think if you throw that out, I think a lot of the perception of Alabama changes. Then Alabama's only losses, Clint, are to Oklahoma and Georgia, who Alabama also beat Oklahoma and Georgia. You wouldn't have a lot. Alabama wouldn't have also been what were they the 8 seed, the 9 seed, and there you'd be much higher if not for the. So throw out the Florida State game. This is the one I want to throw out for Indiana. That's going to surprise some people. But the Illinois game, Indiana crushed Illinois 63-10. It's impressive as heck that they did that. Super impressive. As a matter of fact, Illinois finished 8-4. And you might say, oh, an 8-4 Big Ten team's not an 8-4 SEC team. Well, I agree with that. But keep in mind that 8-4 Illinois team's about to play 8-4 Tennessee in a bowl game. I wouldn't go bet your house on Tennessee. Now, I think Tennessee's going to win. I do. Straight up. I think Tennessee will win the game. But I ain't going to go bet my mortgage on it either. And that's an 8-4 SEC team versus an 8-4 Big Ten team. It's extremely impressive what Indiana did to Illinois that day, beating a quality Big Ten team, an 8-4 Power 4 football team who spent, I think, a couple of weeks this year ranked. They beat them 63-10, I think, 62-10, something like that. I want to throw that out. That's because I don't think there's any world in which Indiana does that more than one time in 10 tries. I think if they played, that was a 1 in 10 result. They played Illinois 10 times. Only once did they house them like that. That's the way because you don't look at Indiana's other results. When they played other good teams, they beat Iowa by 5. They beat Ohio State by 3. They beat Penn State by 3. They beat Oregon by 10. These are all impressive things too, but they didn't beat any of them by 53 or
Correct.
even 43 or 33 or 23. So I throw that game out. That's just an outlier. That's not what this Indiana team is. And if you throw out that 63-10 win over Illinois and you throw out Alabama's loss to Florida State, I think people are looking at this game much differently. I think it's those outlier type performances which are shaping the narrative when they should be looking as what is this Alabama team typically like when they're healthy? And what does Indiana typically do when they play somebody good? It's tight. It comes down to the fourth quarter. Alabama's won a lot of games against good teams in the fourth quarter, and but I think a lot of the national media is like, well, Alabama lost Florida State. Look what Indiana did to Illinois. This game won't be close. I mean, Brett McMurphy picked it 28-10, Indiana.
Yeah, and that's kind of like, I mean, and I understand a lot of people they're going to take this as, oh, you're man, this is some heavy coping, and I get it. I mean, I probably would be accusing others of doing the same if the shoe were on the other foot. But when it's like trying to understand, because once again, Alabama, if they played Oklahoma twice, they played Georgia twice, and they played Vanderbilt, 5 of their 14 games. I mean, that's over a third of their games have been against these borderline college football playoff teams. And, you know, they went 3-2 in those football games. Like, that's not terrible. You look at Indiana, they've played 2 of them all year. They played against Ohio State in the Big Ten championship. They played against Oregon in the, obviously around mid-season. And yes, they got wins over both, and then the 10-point win over Oregon. But like, you look at the common opponent in Wisconsin. I mean, Alabama. Yeah, I mean, what was the final score for Alabama against Wisconsin? 38-14, so it's a 24-point win. Indiana won 31-7, so it's the same difference. But Indiana scored a touchdown with 4 minutes to go in the football game to go up 31-7. They created a larger gap with 4 minutes left. With like 3 or 4 minutes left against Alabama, Wisconsin with backups in and stuff, when they were up 38-7, they scored a touchdown to close that gap and make it 24. So there's a little bit of a difference. Like when they're playing the Purdue's of the world, 56-3, Maryland 55-10, they're winning by 45, they're winning by 53. They go against Illinois, like you said, ended up being an 8-4 football team, but they got beat by 17 points against Wisconsin. You know, we start comparing all these relative opponents. Still a very impressive win. Do not get me wrong. That is why you say that is kind of an outlier. But a 4-8 Michigan State, they beat by 25 points. But then they play somebody that's like, Wisconsin is not a good Big Ten team, but they're better than the Purdue's and they're better than the Marylands this year and things like that. I mean, the similar opponents, I understand not every single week the score is going to look the same, and that this is a data point that tells you, oh, I mean, everybody's got it all wrong. Alabama's the better team. Not saying that. I'm saying that just when we talk about the difference in scheduling to, college football playoff contending opponents versus 5, do we think Indiana is undefeated had they played 5 college football playoff contenders? They might not be 3-2. They might be 4-1, but they would probably be 4-1 bare minimum. And so that is Alabama, just that. And then you can start talking about the Missouris. And, I understand LSU completely fell off. A lot of reasons for that. These bowl games, coaches, changes and everything else. You got offense, your offensive line opting out, entering the transfer. A lot of things can impact bowl games. Don't want to get into that debate. But, when LSU played Alabama, they were a better football team than they are right now, period. Missouri, new quarterback. The fact they didn't have their quarterback available, they did. It was on the road in a hostile environment. Missouri was a better football team. Not saying that they're a great football team, but I think that they kind of compare to the Iowas of the world. I don't think they're that big of a difference, but Alabama's got 5 college football playoff opponents on their resume compared to just 2.
I don't, off the top of my head, I could look it up right now. I think I will in a minute. I don't know who the 10th best team in the Big Ten was. I know who finished 10th in the SEC, LSU. They finished 10th. I'm not sure who finished 10th in the Big Ten, but I can tell you this without knowing even who it was. They don't have Garrett Nussmeier. They don't have Aaron Anderson. they don't have Harold Perkins. They don't have Monsoon Delane, the corner, who's going to be a first-round pick. LSU's full of high-level NFL dudes. They were 10th in the SEC. They're not easy to beat with all with their litany of guys that are headed for Sundays. I'm not sure it's 10th in the Big Ten, but they don't have the NFL players that
Nebraska.
the 10th place. It was Nebraska. There
you
go.
Who doesn't have Dylan Raiola. You can say he's got a lot of talent and stuff, but I mean they do
Raiola
not have,
might be approximately Nussmeier, but he's not throwing to who Nussmeier gets to throw to. I mean,
right.
There's no comparison in terms of the dudes, and that's why. And then who's the third best team? You point out that Alabama really played 5 playoff teams. You consider Vanderbilt. Indiana and Indiana played 2. Their third most impressive win is Iowa, which is a good win. I'm not diminishing it. I think beating Iowa at Iowa is a chore. That's tough. And they did. And I want to congratulate them on winning a quality game. But that's their third. Alabama played Georgia twice, Oklahoma twice. Alabama's third toughest team made the playoff, and Alabama beat them in the playoff. And that's Vanderbilt's fit. I would say beating Vanderbilt roughly the same as beating Iowa. Probably more impressive to beat Vanderbilt, even though Alabama played them at home as opposed to Nashville. No, I think for reasons like that, I don't see this game as the Brett McMurphy see it. It bothers me. It doesn't bother me that someone like him picked Indiana to win. I get it. They're favored by 6.5. They should win the game if you're favored by 6.5. That's a better team that should win per all the numbers out there. But 28-10, I think one of the other guys at On3 picked it 27-7 or somebody said Indiana was going to score 30. Alabama's only given up that kind of points, I think, to that Florida State outlier that we talked about. That's the only time all year, despite playing 5 playoff teams, Alabama just hadn't given up 30 very often this season. I just don't see that happening. But the rain, dude, I still think that ends up being the biggest story. And I think a lot of this analysis goes right down the toilet when the ball is slippery and the field is slippery, and it turns into who can hold on to the ball, who can make a play in the rain. Does a wide receiver get behind the DBs and the quarterback throw a wet duck that the wide receiver holds on to? I mean, crazy stuff happens in crazy weather games, and I would imagine that's exactly what would happen Thursday.
Yeah, I mean, and just really to put a bow on this conversation, because we have kind of hammered it a little bit. I mean, when you go down the list, like teams that Indiana has played with a pulse. Iowa 20-15, and it took them scoring a touchdown with 1.5 minutes left in the game to take the lead in that football game. Oregon, they win 30-20. But once again, they score a field goal with like 3 minutes left in the game to extend it to 10. Otherwise, it was a 1 score. Still a very impressive victory, especially on the road against Oregon. Not taking away from that. Let's go ahead and include Illinois, because when you talk about it being the outlier, this is what you're talking about, because 63-10 against an 8-4 football team, even if they lose to Wisconsin by multiple scores, still doesn't matter. That's super impressive. Super, super impressive. But then you continue to work your way down the list. 7-6 Penn State, definitely a team with a pulse. I would compare them to the LSUs and things like that.
Dudes. They got dudes. That's a dude game like LSU. They got dudes like LSU's got.
Correct. 27-24, late touchdown to Omar Cooper, game-winning touchdown pass for Fernando Mendoza. It was an absolute war. Ohio State, 13-10, once again, beating the number 1 team in the country. Yes, it was a 1-possession game, a field goal game. You barely squeaked by, but you figured out a way to get that win. Every time they've played a team with a pulse, other than Illinois, it has been a complete dogfight, regardless of how good that other team actually was. For Alabama, if you take away the Florida State game, and everybody keeps saying, why would you do that? Why are you going to take away the Florida State game? It's a data point. From an effort standpoint, we have not seen that Alabama team. Even when they got destroyed against Georgia, I didn't see anything remotely close to the lack of effort that I saw against Florida State. which is why we were all freaking out concerned following that game. It wasn't that they got beat, and it wasn't that they got beat by a lot. It was how it looked. It was the lack of hustle, the lack of effort. I have not seen that. And if I had seen even a glimpse of that against anybody else, I would say this has been a theme to some extent throughout the season. That is a problem. But since then, I think they were shell-shocked a little bit. I think they rallied around that, and you have not seen even close to the same team. So that's why I say it is difficult for me to put a whole – I don't put – you notice I didn't say anything. I did mention Old Dominion earlier, just like we talk about Florida State. But, I mean, the fact that that was a dogfight, yes, it's Fernando Mendoza's first game in a Hoosiers uniform. It was – a game that you probably didn't take very seriously. It's probably a lot as far as you calling a very vanilla game plan. You don't want to reveal too much. So I understand all of that ends up playing a factor. But when you look at any time they've played a team with a pulse, it has been a dogfight. And yet you're going to sit here and tell me that you can't tell me at the bare minimum Alabama doesn't have a pulse. You might not think they're all that great, but you can't tell me they're Penn State bad or Iowa bad, or like they're in the same ballpark as them. All of them were in complete dogfights with Indiana, but you're telling me Alabama's going to get blown out? That makes zero sense to me. And to have it at 7 points when that's been the case pretty much all season, and you've seen all these close games and late touchdowns to take a 5-point lead or a 3-point lead. Now you're saying that they're going to beat Alabama. People believe they're going to beat Alabama by more than a touchdown. Just that's not computing for me.
Yeah, I'm not going to get my feathers all ruffled because somebody picks Indiana to win the game 26-20. Okay, that's a very heck. I'll go a likely outcome, but the Indiana's going to boat race Alabama. It makes no sense. There's no evidence that that's going to be the case unless you think Alabama is Illinois, who's an 8-4 team. But is Illinois going to beat Georgia? Is Illinois going to beat Oklahoma? Is Illinois even going to beat Vanderbilt? No. No. So it just boggles my mind. The Alabama will struggle to compete with Indiana. That's a bizarre take to me. Now, it could play out funny, especially with the way the way I look at football just in general, not just this matchup. I think if two teams played each other 10 times, all in the same, like Alabama played Indiana 10 times in Pasadena, I think you're going to get 10 different games, but most of the games would be similar, in my just general football opinion. 5-6 of the games of the 10 would look similar with the same winner by about the same score. 4 of the 10 games are going to look different with different winners, with much different scores. The game just plays out differently for whatever reason. But what I always predict, and I think you predict the same way, is we predict what we think should happen, what's likely to happen. We're predicting what's going to happen, I don't know, 6 out of 10 or 7 of 10 times that these two teams meet. But we both know there are outlier outcomes that, like, boy, I didn't see that coming, or wow, didn't think Indiana turned it over 8 times and would turn it over 5 times in one game. That's a game changer. What if Alabama turns it over 5 times? What if it rains? I mean, there's all sorts of outlier results. I think Indiana blowing out Alabama is an outlier result. That would not happen if they played each other 10 times in the same bill. I refuse to believe that.
I will sit here and say that if Alabama, for one reason or another, especially if it's a sloppy game, it's weather related, Indiana does a lot of uncharacteristic things, turns the football over a lot, does a lot of self-inflicted stuff, which they are not prone to do very often. I'm not going to get on here and say this proves that Indiana was a fraud and Alabama's 24 points better than them. And, no, I'm going to get up here and say more than likely this is an outlier game. I still think that in that instance, if I see Alabama beat Indiana like that, you're not going to convince me that more than 5 times out of 10 or 6 times out of 10 that Alabama would lose. But you can convince me that I still think it would be relatively even. That might not be the approach that a lot of people take. They take these things at face value. But I at least understand that if they played Florida State 10 times in a season, I highly doubt that what you actually got in that football game would be what you got in the other 9. Doesn't mean that it doesn't count. It's still got to count for something. There's a reason head-to-head has to matter. But at the same time, I mean, it was the game against the rematch against Oklahoma was the polar opposite result, pretty much
Yeah.
in every way possible.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you can make arguments for both sides of that. Georgia, Alabama goes to Athens and gets a win, and I would say, despite the fact that Georgia kept it close, it was very evident who the better team was in that football game. That same team got completely drummed against Georgia in the SEC championship. Now, I say same team. Understand injuries did play a part. I've talked about that, but you understand my point where it's like, even with the injuries and stuff, 28 to what should have been, in my opinion, 28 to nothing. The 7 points, it was Georgia doing some dumb things to bail you out and extend that drive and hand you penalty yardage. They were the correct calls, but
Right.
28 to nothing, if someone were to say that's what it should have been, I wouldn't really argue against it. But it's like two polar opposite situations, just about, as far as the spectrum and how these games could work out. That does play it. That's why it's hard to beat a team twice too. Indiana hadn't had to do that. Alabama has had to do that, try to do that when they were the victor the first time around, and the flip side, try to get that win in that second matchup, and it's worked out where they paid for it when they had played a team twice, or it was the second time, and then when they had won or lost the first time, they were able to get a win. So let's talk, very quickly. Where obviously we're not getting into the specific matchups. I'd planned to, but this conversation, I feel like it was a conversation that a lot of Alabama fans have wanted to have, and probably I would assume maybe they feel like we've harped on it, but I hope that they would enjoy it. But let's talk a little bit. We'll do it more so in tomorrow's show, but let's talk a little bit about some of the things that kind of stand out to you as far as, maybe some matchups or things. Like, I'm very curious to see, what Alabama's interior does, defensive line, against Indiana's offensive line. Like, in this potentially sloppy game too, what is that zap? What is the sloppiness? Does it affect strength? No. Does it affect athleticism? Does it make you move a little slower? Are you able to, are your routes going to be as crisp when you're running? To me, it more so affects the athletic teams. Indiana's a little bit more smaller, a little bit more athletic as far as their offensive line, the zone blocking, do a lot of different things. Not saying that will necessarily affect them more than Alabama, but like, what are some matchups that you're looking out for heading into this game?
Their left tackle is a great player. Carter Smith is his name. He's as good as anybody Alabama's played all season per Pro Football Focus. Carter Smith did not give up a sack the entire season. That's incredibly difficult to do. I'm not saying that's correct. I'm just saying that's what PFF says. They named him their first team All-American left tackle.
Rightfully so.
For not giving up a sack. That's remarkable. And it's a good evidence. I saw just some random comment this morning about, Indiana doesn't have Alabama's overall talent profile. 1 through 85, that's correct. 1 through 85, that's correct. 1 through 22, I mean, the starters of both teams on the field, it's not that different. As a matter of fact, Indiana's got 9 guys projected to be taken in this next draft. Alabama's probably going to have a couple more. I think Alabama could have 10 or even 12 guys drafted. But Indiana's going to have 9, including the overall number 1 pick. I don't think the talent profile of the starting lineups are too different.
Correct.
But I do think that up front, defensively for Alabama, the real key is going to be, everybody every week says, well, pressuring the quarterback. Sure. But I think you can't allow Indiana to have a bigger than typical game on the ground. So I think the focus for Alabama is going to be on stopping the run. And I think you're going to see a lot of LT Overton and Jordan Renaud at that bandit spot, because they're very good at setting that edge, or they're better than Keeley. Keeley's more the pass rush guy. And at Wolf, I think Quay-Russaw, you could see a little more of him. Maybe, in the snap share with Yanze Pierre, maybe a little more Quay-Russaw than you might think. Again, why? Good against the run. Whatever 2 of the 3 inside linebackers they feel are the best right now, probably D-Law and JJ against the run. I just see that being the focus. Not because you're trying to make Indiana, one-dimensional. They're not. They're very balanced. They're not one-dimensional. But what you can't do is allow their ground game to control the game. And I've noticed the good teams that Indiana has faced, they've been outrushed by Indiana. Indiana outrushed Ohio State. They outrushed Oregon. It wasn't fluky that they beat Ohio State, by the way. They statistically beat Ohio State. As a matter of fact, if you look at the stats, you're like, Indiana only won that game by 3 points.
Right. That's correct.
They whipped them, even though the score's 13-10. But in part, they did because they were able to run the ball against Ohio State at least a little bit. They outrushed Ohio State. I think you've got to hold Indiana to that 100 yards, 110, 115. That's holding them down. That's going to be, by the way, more rushing yards than Alabama's going to have most likely. But I think that's the challenge for Alabama's interior. I think it's a challenge for the front seven. And of course, we will leave the rain alone. We pounded that enough early in the show. But the challenge for Alabama is limiting, you're not going to shut them out, limiting the Indiana run game to around 100, 110 yards. That's going to force them to score by completing passes down the field. And of course, when you're limited, you've got to get some level of pass rush. The number one pick in the draft will murder you without a pass rush. So you've got to get to Mendoza. And but boy, that's what makes them difficult to beat, right? I mean, because you have to defend the run first. But at the same time, you can't just let Mendoza sit back there and pick you apart, because no one's better equipped to do that than the Heisman winner.
Carter Smith has not allowed a sack all season. You're 100% correct. I would say that their offensive line is pretty good in pass protection across the board. Now, granted, at right tackle, Khalil Benson, he is a guy, I think he's given up 20 pressures this season. I think they're kind of vulnerable on the right side a little bit, but overall, I think they're a pretty good pass blocking offensive line. Fernando Mendoza is the reigning Heisman Trophy winner, and he's projected to go number 1 overall in the NFL draft. And you've got a couple of day 2 receivers. You got some talented dudes that are going to be playing on the next level. If I were to tell you all of that, it would probably shock a lot of people for me to say, going into this game, I still think the bigger priority for Alabama defensively is stopping the run, because Indiana's offense, the way that it operates, a lot of early down runs, they want to set up favorable situations. And when they're able to set up the second 5s, the second 4s, the 3rd and 1s, the 3rd and 2s, they are, as far as the RPO and kind of play action and how they attack you, it makes their offense that much more effective. So I think for Alabama, it is winning the early downs, which means winning against the run more than winning against the pass. If you can set Indiana's offense up in a lot of unfavorable situations, the 2nd and longs, the 2nd and 11s, the 3rd and 8s, those types of situations, I don't think Alabama is very comfortable in those. Now, granted, they might not be if the weather ends up playing a factor, but typically Alabama is not super uncomfortable in the 3rd and longs. I would not say the same thing about Indiana. I'm not saying they can't be successful, because you do have that talent at quarterback and at receiver, but it's not how they want to win. So you're forcing them to beat you in a different way than they're used to. I think that is the priority for Alabama. And if the game plan is now granted, you can, once again, if the weather doesn't play a factor, you cannot approach this in the same way that you did against Missouri, because Fernando Mendoza's arm is way more effective and complementary to what they do on the ground than what Missouri had with Bo Pribula. But if the weather takes care of that, and they're kind of anticipating, and the priority anyways is to stop the run, and they can do that as effectively or close to as effectively as they did against Missouri, who not only had Ahmad Hardy, they had a couple of really good running backs, so they had a little bit of a rotation. Yeah, I mean, they had a couple of good players in that game, and they shut down for the most part, and once again gave up some explosives, but they were overall very effective slowing down Ahmad Hardy. If they can do that, then I think that does end up favoring Alabama. And I do think Alabama is going to be a lot more effective. You say 100, 110, don't think that's out of the realm of possibility at all. In fact, I would say that's the most likely situation, at least getting to that number. But I also think there are situations or ways that this could work out where Alabama's been much better at limiting the explosive runs, and the explosive runs have really been what has caused Alabama's defense to not look great as far as being able to stop the run. On a snap-in, snap-out basis, they have been pretty effective. They just give up with the chunks from time to time, and then against Georgia, they had the chunks, and it was pretty consistent. If they can limit the chunks and continue to do what they've done on a snap in, snap out basis, I think you could even hold Indiana lower than that as far as the rushing total. I think this run defense can be very, very good. And I think that if you allow them for one reason or another, whether it be Mother Nature or, another reason, if you allow them to hone in on that a little bit, I think they can be very, very good stopping the run. So that is going to be something to keep an eye on, but understand they're a little bit different. If you look at their actual rushing success as a team, the numbers actually aren't vastly different outside, inside of how Indiana wins versus how Missouri wins. But what they call, like, you'll see the wide zone, the outside zone, whatever you want to call it, but they're more of a heavy inside zone type of run scheme. Missouri, more so, in my opinion, is an outside zone and then complements it with the inside zone. So it's like the polar opposite. So it is a little bit different. But Alabama against Missouri, they did a phenomenal job of being aggressive on the edges. And I think that you might end up seeing that. Now, understand that Indiana is not going to do a lot of 12 personnel. It's not how they operate. They are going to they're going to pretty much live in 11 personnel. You might get some 10, but it's pretty much 11. So you're going to see a lot of 4-2-5, if I had to guess. I don't think you're going to see a whole lot of multiple wolves. Maybe you see a little bit of that if they feel like that Indiana's size is a huge threat. I think they're going to respect them more than that and have, especially getting LT Everton back. I just don't really see. They'll probably go their standard 4-2-5. You'll see them playing in the 3-3-5 looks where they drop the wolf off the line of scrimmage, and there will be times where fans get, why are you putting 3 men on the line of scrimmage? That's how they play, especially against 11 personnel. But you got to be aggressive. You got to cause a lot of havoc and chaos on early downs. And then if you can put them in those third and longer situations, I do think they have some vulnerabilities on their offensive line, but we'll be talking about that more tomorrow. Jimmy, do you have anything else before we hop out of here, brother?
No, I just love your comp of, you've brought up Missouri a lot. I love that line of thinking about how kind of similar they are, while at the same time acknowledging the difference. But I do like that. I mean, in terms of balance and Bo versus Fernando, and then that run game, they just do it a little differently. I think so much of what's going to happen Thursday for Alabama defensively, Clint, to me, is what happens on the perimeter. What I'm hoping, what I'm wish casting here, what I'm hoping is that on those run downs, like you said, I don't think this is a 2-wolf game. I don't think it's a 2-bandit game. And by that, I mean, you can't sell out to stop the run because they can throw it too well. You can't sell out to stop the pass because they run it. I think it's a 1-bandit, 1-wolf type alignment for Alabama in the game. And on the early downs, when it's Overton and Quay Russaw stop the run, force them into the third and longs where you see Keeley and Pierre. That's how Alabama wins the game. Those big-time performances from the outside guys as run stuffers. Now, they funnel a lot inside, but that starts with setting the edge, funneling it inside where Tim Keenan and D-Law and Justin Jefferson are. That's going to be how you win this game. Run defense with LT and Quay, get them into the third and longs, and then let Keeley and Pierre loose.
Yeah, and I think that Justin Hill could end up playing a part. Just his ability. Now, granted, you're going to get some freshman mistakes out of him, but his ability to set the edge and play with some power despite his size, I could see that being kind of, because he can provide some athleticism and juice, and he can play off the ball, play on the ball, do all those things. But his ability to set the edge is, to me, could end up playing a part in this game.
Love it.
So that's definitely something. I think you'll see all 3 Wolves, and maybe even some Noah Carter, but I think Noah Carter probably plays a much, smaller role than the other 3. One of the things to keep in mind, and we'll be talking about this more tomorrow as well, one of the big things that stands out, and it's something you got to flip the script a little bit and at least change some things up. Alabama has struggled to sustain blocks, and I don't think I've seen a defense better at getting off of blocks than Indiana. So, I mean, especially like Fisher, their off-ball linebacker, that cat, his ability to elude blocks and doesn't really run through people's faces. He doesn't stack and shed at an elite level. He's just really, really good at just slipping and avoiding blocks. Alabama has got to get their hands on guys and sustain blocks at a higher pace, despite the fact that now you're going against an opponent who does it extremely, or gets off of blocks extremely well. You still have to be more effective at sustaining blocks than they have been up to this point. But once again, we'll be talking about that more tomorrow. Appreciate you, Jimmy, for hopping on here with me. We hope everybody had a Merry Christmas. We were, me personally, was kind of up and down as far as the content, but we are full steam ahead. A lot to talk about. Certainly appreciate you. If you haven't already, get on over to rowback.com. I know Christmas just passed, but if you got all the money from, you got some money to spend, get on over to rowback.com. Use the promo code Crimson20 to get 20% off your order, and we will talk to you guys soon.